All right, a live look in New York City where day 5 of the United Nations General Assembly is currently underway. We expect to see a number of global leaders take to that podium today. But the speeches were kicked off by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this morning. Netanyahu, as you know, has faced international backlash and accusations of war crimes over Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. He also faces growing pressure to end the conflict that continues to escalate. The Prime Minister touched on that, but he also took a moment to address the threats his country faces on every front. Take a listen.
Half the Houthi leadership in Yemen, gone. Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, gone. Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, gone. The Assad regime in Syria, gone. Those militias in Iraq, well, they're still deterred. And their leaders, if they attack Israel, will also be gone. And for Iran's top military commanders and its top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too.
Now let's bring in CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis, who's live for us from the United Nations. Olivia, thank you for joining us. A 40-minute address from the Prime Minister there. What stood out to you from what he had to say?
Sure, Mugo. It was remarkable that even after this weeks-long global crescendo, this wave of countries that have moved to recognize a Palestinian state, now more than 150 of them doing so, the Prime Minister was completely unapologetic as he stood behind the podium today, making no mention of the nearly 60,000 people who have been killed over the course of an almost 2-year war in Gaza, instead boasting of the military successes that Israel has had in eliminating the leader of Hamas, in eliminating nuclear scientists and generals in Iran, and almost exactly a year ago taking an enormous strike in Beirut, Lebanon, that killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Lebanese Hezbollah. As he started his remarks, there was a wave of protests with a number of delegates getting up and leaving the room. This was expected. The UN ambassador from Israel saying that it was a cheap stunt, a set of theatrics that had been orchestrated by the Palestinians. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu reserved some of his harshest criticism for the Palestinian Authority and for the Western countries that have moved to recognize a Palestinian state, calling the leaders of those countries weak-kneed, saying that they were encouraging terrorism, and saying that Israel would never accept a terror state being shoved down its throat. Some very strong words there.
Yeah, indeed. Now, President Trump, he spoke to reporters shortly after Netanyahu's remarks, and he says there may be a possible deal on Gaza to get the hostages back. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think we have maybe a deal on Gaza, very close to a deal on Gaza. How are you? Hello, Peter. And it's looking like we have a deal on Gaza. And we'll let you know. I think it's a deal that will get the hostages back. It's going to be a deal that will end the war. It's going to be a deal it's going to be peace. I think we have a deal. That'll be number 8, Peter.
All right, Olivia, the president, he did not share many details on what all of that deal entails, but we heard a very firm message from Netanyahu to Hamas about what will happen if the hostages are not released. What did he say?
That's right. He spoke of this unprecedented action, he said, of installing loudspeakers around Gaza and using Israeli intelligence to stream his remarks live for people in Gaza to listen to. Listen to what he had to say about that operation.
Thanks to special efforts by Israeli intelligence, my words are now also being carried. They're streamed live to the cell phones of Gazans. So to the remaining Hamas leaders and to the jailers of our hostages, I now say, lay down your arms. Let my people go. Free the hostages, all of them, the whole 48. Free the hostages now. If you do, you will live. If you don't, Israel will hunt you down.
Right, so you hear the Prime Minister there asserting that these were live messages streamed in Gaza. It's unclear how many of them were actually heard by the people there, but very much doubling down on the continuation of this military campaign, which we know is still underway in Gaza City. He gave very little indication of what he actually thought of this proposal being put together by the Trump administration, a 21-point plan circulated among Muslim and Arab leaders here at the UN General Assembly this week. He also gave no indication of what he thought of President Trump pushing back on the notion that Israel could annex parts of the West Bank. He does travel to Washington on Monday to meet with the president in person.
All right, Olivia Gazis at the United Nations headquarters there for us. Thank you so much for your time.
So let's bring in CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Kealy. Courtney, good to have you with us today. First of all, what stood out to you during Netanyahu's address? We understand it was about 40 minutes making the case.
Well, at the beginning, it was just the real isolation on the world stage. Everyone left the room except for friends and guests that were invited by Prime Minister Netanyahu, according to the Israeli mission to the UN, who said that. So it was mainly his own guests. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has spoken to the UN, and he is a great orator. There is nothing to dispute about that. He also uses his props. He had a QR code that you could put your phone camera up to, and that will lead you to the atrocities and the just massacre that happened on October 7th, nearly 2 years ago. But while he's holding up that map, another prop, and he says the curse, all of those leaders he was mentioning have been eradicated. That so-called axis of evil, axis of resistance that built up 20 to 25 years. In the last year, it's been a stunning reversal of fortune for Iran and all of its proxy militias. And he said Hamas is not completely eliminated. He said the final remnants of Hamas, we must finish the job. So that was very interesting. But then in the core of it, it does require some fact-checking.
Well, Netanyahu also touched on what is a huge and growing chorus of the accusation of genocide over the war. What did he say on that point?
He basically said there is none, and that's been widely disputed by scholars, by human rights lawyers and activists, by two human rights groups inside Israel, B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights. But let's hear to exactly what he said. Listen to. Okay, so we actually are not going to listen to his exact words, but basically when he says that, it is consistent with what he has said before. And but now there's this chorus, this international chorus, not just people, but lawyers, activists, The Hague, where he's wanted for war crimes. He didn't speak directly to that. But when he also did was he put loudspeakers trying to speak directly to the hostages within Gaza City and that perimeter. I have checked with people, and other news organizations have checked to see if people around the Palestinians could hear that. They did not. We don't know if hostages heard his message in Hebrew and English, speaking directly to them at the UN. That was also very important and very key. And lastly, the fact check that is something else we have to look at is he talked about that the most deaths inside Gaza are mainly Hamas. That's been widely debated, but according to the Israeli Defense Forces database from May 2025, it says of the more than 52,000 recorded deaths, 83% were civilians. And the Lancet went as so far as to say, and the vast majority of that are women and children. So we're looking at a 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio, but when he disputed civilian deaths, that is disputed by his own military force, the Israeli Defense Forces.
Courtney Kealy, CBS News Middle East reporter, watching the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you so much.
Our CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams was watching all of this from our London bureau. Holly, you've been to the region, to these areas many times. What stood out to you most from what we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister?
Errol, I thought this was actually kind of an extraordinary moment in the history of the UN. I mean, the first part of the speech, after all those delegates walked out, seemed to be a message from Benjamin Netanyahu to those people or those governments who see Israel's behaviour in Gaza as unacceptable or even genocidal. And he seemed to be trying to recast Israel's actions as heroic, saying that Israel has hammered the Houthis, crippled Hezbollah, crushed much of Hamas and devastated Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. He seemed to be actually saying that Israel deserved to hear a thank you from the rest of the world. He then vowed to push on in Gaza, saying that the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. Then he brought up, as you were discussing before, the loudspeakers, the massive loudspeakers that Israel had ranged around Gaza. And his message to the hostages was that we have not forgotten you. He said that his speech was being streamed live to cell phones in Gaza, and his message to Hamas was to lay down your arms, let my people go. There was a real element of kind of showmanship here, and that culminated with this pop quiz that he held up, a multiple choice test. The message of that seemed to be for Americans. He seemed to want to remind Americans of the people and groups that use death to America as part of their slogan. And then it culminated, I think, in this kind of condemnation of those countries, American allies, that recently have recognized a Palestinian state. He said to them, you caved, you buckled under the pressure. He said, you can't appease your way out of jihad. You have to stand with Israel. He said that recognizing a Palestinian state was sheer madness, and he equated a Palestinian state in the West Bank to giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City.
After 9/11, really remarkable language and rhetoric from the Israeli Prime Minister, which he has become known to deliver at the UN General Assembly. Holly, in our last few minutes, earlier this morning on the CBS Morning News, you and I were speaking about President Trump's pushback to Netanyahu in not annexing the West Bank. The Israeli Prime Minister is scheduled to meet with Donald Trump soon. How might that meeting go, considering that the U.S. delegation stayed in the room, has been a staunch supporter and ally of Israel, but there does appear to be some space on the position of both nations?
Right, so following those US allies recognizing a Palestinian state earlier this week, there'd been some speculation that Israel could retaliate by annexing the West Bank. That is, not just occupying it with military force, but actually officially claiming it as part of Israel. That would be an extremely contentious move. And I think people were listening to this speech for any signs that the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu was pushing him further towards a peace deal. I don't think we really heard that. Or whether instead he and Israel had shifted the other way, and that he might be moving towards annexing the West Bank. As for his meeting with Donald Trump, with President Trump, I think that there are signs, there's certainly been reporting that President Trump is growing frustrated with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in particular over Israel's strikes against targeting Hamas leaders in Qatar, which is also a US partner.
A significant moment, a flashpoint here as the Israeli Prime Minister addresses the UN General Assembly. My thanks to our CBS News senior foreign correspondent, Holly Williams in London, to our CBS News Middle East reporter, Courtney Kealy, here with me in studio, and our CBS News intelligence and national security reporter, Olivia Gazis, outside the UN. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center. Our coverage continues right now with Vladimir Duthier here on CBS News 24/7.